The real danger on the frontier was what a man kept hidden. Objects stitched into coat linings, tucked inside boot tops, or buried at the bottom of a saddlebag where no one thought to look. These weren't weapons of pride. They were instruments of desperation, carried by men who knew that if the wrong person found them, the conversation would end with a rope or a bullet. These were the items the frontier buried, tools of survival, deception, and violence that men trusted more than luck, because luck ran out, and these didn't. Today, we're uncovering 15 objects cowboys hid because discovery meant death. Not the legendary six-shooters or famous rifle rigs. The other things? The ones history tried to forget. No myths, no romance, just the truth about what men carried when the only real protection was making sure no one ever knew they had it. Number 15, illegal conversion cylinders, the second reload. A man walks into a saloon in Dodge City carrying an old Colt Navy, percussion caps, black powder, a gun that takes 30 seconds to reload. What no one sees is the spare cylinder in his vest pocket, bored through for metallic cartridges ready to swap in 10 seconds flat. If trouble starts, he's not fumbling with powder and ball. He's firing modern ammunition from a gun that looks harmless. These conversion cylinders were small steel drums hand-machined by gunsmiths in back rooms across Texas, Kansas, and the territories. They turned outdated cap and ball revolvers into cartridge-firing weapons without buying a new gun. Some were professionally made. Most were rough work, chambers bored unevenly, timing off, liable to misfire. Carrying one wasn't always illegal, but hiding one was suspicious. A man with a converted revolver looked prepared for violence. A man with a spare cylinder looked like he expected it. Town marshals who found conversion cylinders during searches didn't ask questions. They assumed intent. And intent on the frontier was often enough for a cell, or a beating behind the jail if the marshal was in a bad mood. The cylinders were small enough to vanish in a coat pocket, light enough to forget you were carrying them. Some men wrapped them in oilcloth to keep the chambers clean, until the moment you needed to remember. Number 14, concealed shotgun drop rigs, the argument ender. A stagecoach guard sits on the box with both hands visible, a coach gun resting in a scabbard by his knee. Standard equipment, expected. What passengers don't see is the second shotgun, a sawed-off 12-gauge hung from a leather strap beneath his coat, barrel angled toward the floor, trigger within reach of a finger that never strays far. Concealed shotgun drop rigs were crude contraptions, usually homemade. A leather loop over the shoulder, a strap across the chest, and a short-barreled scattergun tucked against the ribs where a coat hid the outline. Drawing meant dropping the shoulder and grabbing the stock as it swung free. These rigs weren't elegant. They were insurance. Guards, gamblers, and men expecting ambush wore them because a hidden shotgun ended arguments before they started. At close range, nothing else compared. But possession of a sawed-off shotgun was a serious matter. Cutting a barrel below legal length meant the gun existed for one purpose: killing men at close quarters. Lawmen who found one didn't file paperwork. They filed charges. The rigs themselves showed wear from constant use, shoulder straps darkened by sweat, leather loops stretched from the weight of steel. Men who carried them adjusted their coats carefully and learned to move without letting the barrel swing. And if the wrong crowd discovered the rig first, the wearer rarely made it to a cell at all. Number 13, stolen badges and false star pins, borrowed authority. A stranger rides into town wearing a tarnished badge pinned inside his coat. He flashes it once at the livery, asks a few questions, and rides out before anyone checks his story. By the time the real marshal hears about it, the stranger is gone, along with whatever information or goods he talked someone into handing over. Stolen badges and counterfeit star pins circulated across the territories, passed between grifters, bounty hunters working outside the law, and outlaws looking for an edge. Some were genuine, lifted from dead lawmen or stolen from offices. Others were crudely stamped tin, convincing enough in dim light. Carrying a false badge was impersonation, and impersonating a peace officer was a hanging offense in more than a few jurisdictions. Even if it wasn't, the reaction from real lawmen was predictable. A man caught wearing a badge he hadn't earned faced questions he couldn't answer, and frontier interrogations rarely stayed polite. These pins were small, easy to hide, and dangerous to possess. Men kept them sewn into coat linings or tucked into belt pouches, ready to produce when needed and vanish when the situation turned. Some carried multiple badges from different counties, switching them depending on where they traveled. The real danger wasn't the law. It was other lawmen. A genuine marshal who caught someone wearing a false star took it personally. The impersonation made the real badge worth less, and men who'd earned their authority didn't tolerate those who hadn't. The badge gave authority. Getting caught with it took everything else away. Number 12. Blackjacks and weighted gloves. Quiet bone breakers. A card game turns ugly. Words are exchanged. A man stands, and before anyone draws, he swings, and his opponent drops like a sack of grain, skull-cracked, fight over. No gun was fired, no blade was drawn, just a leather pouch filled with lead shot or a glove with iron sewn into the knuckles. Blackjacks were short, flexible clubs, leather wrapped around a lead core, small enough to fit in a palm and heavy enough to fracture bone. Weighted gloves worked the same way, iron plates stitched inside the fingers, so a punch landed like a hammer strike. Both were illegal in most cattle towns. Carrying a concealed bludgeon was considered premeditated assault, and using one in a fight meant the difference between a scuffle and attempted murder. Lawmen who found them during searches didn't wait for explanations. Men hid them in coat pockets, tucked into waistbands, or strapped to forearms beneath sleeves. They were silent, untraceable, and brutal. A man could kill with one and walk away before anyone understood what happened. The frontier tolerated fistfights. It didn't tolerate weapons designed to end them before they started. Number 11. Sharpened spurs, boots that cut back. A cowhand's spurs jingle as he walks. Normal, expected. No one looks twice, but the rowels on these spurs aren't factory steel. They've been filed to points, edges honed, until they cut like knives. In a brawl, a kick becomes a slashing attack. In a grapple on the ground, they turn boots into weapons. Sharpened spurs were common among men who expected close-quarters violence, drovers passing through rough towns, gamblers working crooked games, drifters who'd learned that fists alone didn't always settle things. The modification was simple. A few hours with a file turned blunt rowels into serrated edges, capable of tearing flesh. The spurs still looked like working gear. They still functioned on horseback. But their real purpose was hidden in plain sight. Getting caught with sharpened spurs meant trouble. Town marshals recognized the modification immediately, and carrying weapons disguised as tools suggested premeditation. A man wearing them wasn't defending himself, he was hunting. Most men removed them before entering town, strapping on standard spurs until they left again. The ones who forgot often regretted it. Number 10. Hidden manacles and garrots. Tools for silence. Some men didn't carry weapons to win fights. They carried tools to end them silently. A short length of chain with cuffs on each end. A loop of braided wire with wooden handles. A leather cord thin enough to vanish inside a hatband. Hidden manacles and garrots were the tools of men who worked in shadows, bounty hunters operating outside the law, thieves who couldn't afford witnesses, and killers who needed silence more than speed. Manacles could restrain a man without drawing attention. A garrote could silence him permanently. Neither made noise, neither left obvious wounds, and both were small enough to hide in a boot top or coat lining. Possession of either was damning. Lawmen who found them didn't ask about intent. The objects spoke for themselves. A man carrying hidden restraints or a strangling cord wasn't preparing for self-defense. He was preparing for something else entirely. Some garrotes were simple, a length of piano wire with wooden toggles. Others were braided from horsehair or wrapped in leather to prevent slipping. The best ones left no marks that looked like murder. The punishment varied by jurisdiction, but the suspicion was universal. These weren't tools of honest men, and the men who carried them knew it. Number 9. Counterfeit coins and lead slugs. Money that got you killed. A drifter pays for a meal with a silver dollar. The coin looks right, feels right, rings almost true when dropped on the counter, but the merchant notices the weight is off. The edge is too smooth, and when he bites down, the metal gives. Lead slugs and counterfeit coins circulated across the frontier, passed by grifters, outlaws, and desperate men hoping to stretch nothing into something. Some were lead cores coated in silver wash. Others were genuine coins shaved thin, the missing metal melted down and sold. Passing counterfeit currency was a federal offense, but on the frontier, federal law moved slowly. Local justice moved fast. A merchant who caught a man passing bad coin didn't wait for authorities. He called for the crowd. Counterfeiters faced beatings, public humiliation, and sometimes worse. In mining towns where hard currency meant survival, a man caught with lead slugs might not make it to morning. The coins were hidden in false compartments, sewn into clothing, or mixed with genuine currency so a search wouldn't find them all. Discovery meant ruin. Sometimes it meant death. Number 8. Spring blade, knuckle knives. The surprise blade. A man throws a punch, and halfway through the swing, a blade snaps out from between his fingers. Spring blade knuckle knives combined the impact of a fist with the cutting edge of a dagger. Worn over the hand like brass knuckles, they featured a short blade that locked flat until a squeeze released it, turning a brawl into a stabbing in the time it took to close a fist. These were specialty weapons made by gunsmiths and metalworkers in places like St. Louis and San Francisco for men who expected violence and wanted an edge no one could see coming. Carrying one was a death sentence if discovered. The weapon existed for one purpose: to kill or maim without warning. No lawman accepted self-defense as an excuse. No jury believed a man wearing one wasn't looking for trouble. They were hidden in coat pockets, slipped into gloves, or strapped to forearms beneath sleeves. Small enough to forget, deadly enough to remember. The men who carried them knew the risk. They carried them anyway. Number 7. False bottom saddlebags, the missing space. A rider is stopped by a deputy outside Abilene. His bags are searched, his coat patted down, his boots checked. Nothing found. He rides on. What the deputy missed was the second compartment, a false bottom built into the saddlebag's floor, thin enough to escape notice, deep enough to hold stolen goods, contraband, or cash that couldn't be explained. False bottom saddlebags were standard equipment for smugglers, horse thieves, and men moving things they shouldn't have. Saddlers in border towns built them to order, stitching hidden pockets beneath the main compartment where fingers didn't reach. Inside, men hid stolen jewelry, opium, forged documents, and currency too clean to have been earned honestly. Some carried weapons, spare revolvers or knives that never appeared during searches. Getting caught with a false compartment was suspicious. Getting caught with contraband inside was worse. The hidden space itself suggested guilt, and once a lawman found it, everything that followed assumed intent. Deputies learned to check bag weight against apparent capacity. The construction was careful. Saddlers built false floors from thin leather stretched over wooden frames, stitched tight enough to hold weight without sagging. The best work was invisible, even when empty. The saddlebags looked normal. That was the point. And the men who carried them counted on no one looking close enough to notice. Number 6. Slung shots and sap clubs. One swing only. A drunk staggers out of a saloon. A figure follows. 30 seconds later, the drunk is on the ground, pockets emptied, skull fractured. No shots fired, no screams, just the quiet thud of a slung shot doing its work. Slingshots were simple, a heavy weight sewn into a leather pouch attached to a short strap or handle. Swung hard, they cracked skulls. Swung carefully, they dropped a man without killing him. Sap clubs were similar, lead cores wrapped in leather, shaped to fit the hand. Both were silent, concealable, and brutally effective. Carrying either was illegal in most frontier towns. Ordinances specifically banned loaded clubs and bludgeons, and lawmen treated possession as proof of criminal intent. A man with a slingshot wasn't protecting himself. He was planning to hurt someone. These weapons were hidden in coat sleeves, tucked into waistbands, or carried in deep pockets where they waited for the right moment. The men who used them rarely faced fair fights. They preferred it that way. Number 5. Hand-modified shotgun loads. Built to tear, a scattergun fires, and the man on the receiving end doesn't just fall. He's torn apart. Standard buckshot was deadly enough. But some men wanted more. They hand-loaded their shells with nails, broken glass, or irregular chunks of lead designed to spread wider and cut deeper. These modified loads turned shotguns into horror weapons. At close range, they didn't wound, they destroyed. Survivors described wounds that looked like animal attacks, tissue shredded beyond recognition. Possession of modified ammunition was difficult to prove, but easy to suspect. A lawman who found irregular loads in a man's possibles assumed the worst. The shells existed for one reason: to cause maximum damage to human flesh. Men carried them hidden among standard ammunition, indistinguishable until fired. The modification was invisible. The intent was not. Using them in a gunfight changed the nature of the killing. Self-defense became murder. A clean shooting became butchery. And the men who loaded them knew exactly what they were carrying. Number 4. Poison vials. Death without noise. Not every killing on the frontier happened with a gun. Small glass vials tucked into vest pockets or hidden inside hollow coat buttons held substances that worked slower, but just as surely. Strychnine, arsenic, belladonna. A few grains in a drink, a meal, or a water barrel, and a man died without a mark on him. Poison was the weapon of patience. It required access, timing, and the nerve to watch someone die without flinching. Women used it more often than men, but men carried it too. Gamblers who needed rivals removed, drifters with grudges, and killers who preferred not to face their victims. Getting caught with poison was worse than getting caught with a gun. Firearms suggested a fair fight. Poison suggested premeditation, cowardice, and something darker than simple violence. A shooter might claim self-defense. A poisoner had no such excuse. Frontier justice was harsh for shooters. It was merciless for poisoners. Mobs didn't wait for trials. The method of killing determined the manner of punishment. The vials were small enough to hide anywhere. Their contents were colorless, odorless, and undetectable until too late. Some men disguised them as medicine bottles. By the time anyone suspected, the work was already done. Number 3. Loaded dice and marked cards. The last hand. A gambler wins too often. The table notices. Questions start. And when someone grabs his deck and finds the tiny pinpricks on the corners, or picks up his dice and feels the weight shift wrong, the questions stop. What happens next isn't a conversation. Loaded dice and marked cards were common across the frontier, carried by sharps and cheats who made their living taking money from men who couldn't afford to lose it. The modifications were subtle. Shaved edges, weighted cores, faint scratches invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Getting caught meant violence. Saloon justice was immediate and brutal. A man exposed as a cheat faced beatings, broken hands, and sometimes a bullet before he reached the door. No lawman intervened, no trial followed. Gamblers hid their crooked equipment in coat linings, false compartments, or separate pockets from their legitimate decks. They switched sets when suspicion rose and disappeared before patterns emerged. The tools themselves showed craftsmanship. Loaded dice were weighted with mercury or drilled and filled with lead. Marked cards were pricked with needles or trimmed along the edges. The best work passed inspection. The worst got men killed. The winnings were good. The risk was absolute. And the men who played that game knew exactly how it ended when the luck ran out. Number 2. Derringers and palm pistols. The hidden shot. A man sits at a card table with empty hands. No holster, no belt gun, no threat, until his palm moves and a 2-shot Derringer appears from nowhere. Hammer back, barrel pressed against ribs before anyone draws. Derringers and palm pistols were the hidden guns of the frontier. Small enough to fit inside a coat, a vest, or a specially sewn pocket, they appeared when everything else failed. The Remington Derringer fired a .41 caliber round at contact range, enough to kill. Palm pistols, like the Protector, were even smaller, squeezed rather than triggered, deadly at arm's length, and useless beyond. Carrying a concealed firearm violated town ordinances across the West, but these weapons were designed to be invisible. Men hid them in waistbands, boot tops, hatbands, and sleeves. Women tucked them into corsets and muffs. Discovery meant arrest at best, confiscation, and a beating at worst. But the men and women who carried them accepted the risk, because when the main gun failed, the hidden one decided who walked away. Number 1. Boot knives and sleeve daggers. The final option. The most dangerous weapon on the frontier wasn't the one on a man's hip. It was the one no one knew he had. Boot knives rode inside the shaft, handles worn smooth from years of sweat and friction. Sleeve daggers strapped to forearms, blades thin enough to hide beneath fabric, edges honed until they drew blood from a breath. These weren't fighting knives. They were killing knives, designed for the moment when distance vanished and the only option was steel against flesh. Men reached for them when revolvers jammed, when holsters emptied, when a fight closed to grappling range, and the man who drew first lived. The blades were short, the handles simple, the sheaths nothing more than leather sleeves darkened by years of body heat. Carrying a concealed blade was illegal in most jurisdictions, treated as proof of violent intent. But the law only mattered if someone found it. And the men who carried boot knives and sleeve daggers made certain no one did, until the blade was already out and the fight was already over. These weapons weren't symbols. They were last chances, hidden where only desperation would reach. 15 items, each one hidden because discovery meant the end of something, a reputation, a freedom, a life. The frontier wasn't kind to men who showed their cards. It punished honesty and rewarded the ones who kept their advantages invisible until the moment they mattered. These objects weren't collector's pieces or museum curiosities. They were working tools carried by men who understood that survival often depended on what stayed hidden more than what was shown. Hollywood gave the West open holsters and fair fights. The real frontier ran on secrets, stitched into linings, tucked into boots, buried at the bottom of saddlebags where searches didn't reach. The men who survived longest weren't the fastest or the strongest. They were the ones who made sure no one ever knew what they were carrying, until it was too late to matter.